Hello, and welcome back to this week's episode of The Conversation with me, Jordan Brown. This week, we're going to be talking with Maestro Anthony Parnther, the music director and conductor of both the San Bernardino Symphony Orchestra in San Bernardino, California, and the Southeast Symphony in Los Angeles. Anthony also serves as the artistic director of Musicians at Play in Burbank, California, and as a resident conductor of the newly established Orchestra US. Anthony has embraced an international career that emphasizes his passion for storytelling with audiences, advocating for underrepresented talent in the concert hall, and cultivating inspiring experiences with underserved communities. He has conducted artists spanning every musical genre, including Joshua Bell, Jesse Norman, Yundi Lee, Frederica von Stade, Roderick Williams, the Canadian Brass, Kanye West, Imagine Dragons, Jennifer Holliday, Lynn Harrell, and Alan Walker. Recent guests conducting engagements include a wide variety of ensembles and festivals, including the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Tulsa Symphony Orchestra, Eugene Symphony, Toledo Symphony, Hollywood Chamber Orchestra, and the World Opera Forum in Madrid, Spain, and so many more. Over the last decade, Anthony has conducted the Hollywood Studio Symphony on a lengthy list of top film, television, and video game entities in the world. Recent projects include Star Wars, The Mandalorian, Tenet, Little, The Hunt, Fargo, The Long Way Back, The Night of, Ghostbusters Afterlife, and League of Legends. Join me in welcoming Maestro Anthony Parnther. Let's get into it. So I really want to start with what brought you to this career choice? I think that this is such an amazing thing that you do, being a maestro, being in this, correct me if I'm wrong, being in this orchestra space and really working with all of these different people and putting together these amazing pieces. What is that like for you? How did you get inspired to be in this field?
I was always curious when watching orchestras growing up. You know, I thought it was really cool to see all these people playing all these different instruments in an orchestra. But I was really curious about what that one person who had their back turned to the audience, who was waving their arms around. I was like, well, that person is not playing an instrument and they look like they're in charge. So there was a part of that that was a little intriguing to me. So I think that might have been the initial draw. And then of course, once I actually got in an orchestra, seeing the things that could occur when an effective conductor was in front of an orchestra, I thought was also kind of a draw. But yeah, it is a kind of a mysterious job because that person's not playing a musical instrument, yet they're involved in the decision making about the music making at large. So it is often kind of a mysterious and odd job.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I'm definitely curious. I'm one of those people that's like, okay, I know that they're leading in some sort of way, but what is that like? Can you translate that to people who don't know anything about orchestras?
Yeah. You know, for a long time, especially, you know, 1600s, 1700s, and part of the 1800s, there largely was not a conductor. But as the music began to get more complex and as the orchestras began to get larger, the need for a conductor became more eminent. So, you know, I think at its most basic core, a conductor has a responsibility to create an environment where good music can be made. It gets a lot more specific than that, of course, because you have some basic duties. One is keeping time. So you're setting tempo with one hand. And so, you know, if it's fast, then you need to conduct fast. If it's slow, then you need to conduct slowly. So it's a quick way of unifying. You know, orchestras can be rather big, you know, 70, 80, 90, 100 people. So how do you quickly get 100 people on the same page? Well, you do that with a good conductor. So one hand principally is responsible for tempo, and then another hand is responsible for time. So I mean, even though you're not necessarily familiar, maybe some of your audiences aren't necessarily familiar with the exact duties of a conductor are. If I'm conducting like this, what does that probably sound like an orchestra should be doing?
I don't know, it's like sharper sounds?
Absolutely. As opposed to something that's more like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's getting strings.
Yeah, smooth, legato, and things along those lines. And sometimes it's both of those things at the same time, you know. And then, you've got a whole bunch of people playing, and then you do this, palms towards somebody, you usually tell somebody to stop or to do less of, or you can summon more sound or more energy from an orchestra with all of these things. So there's a language that goes between the conductor and his or her musicians from the podium. So that's like the starting point. Then it gets a lot more nuanced with all of those things.
I feel like I just took in so much information. At one point, I've been listening to a lot of classical music recently. It really helps me get through all of my readings. And so I've been kind of paying attention and noticing things and listening to a few different composers. I'm definitely not well versed in it at all, but I really do enjoy it. Okay, so who's your favorite composer? If you have one.
That's probably one of the least fair questions you could ask a musician. It's like, which limb would you like to keep? Yeah, that's probably an impossible question. But if I absolutely had to pick one composer, I would probably say that it all leads back to Beethoven.
Okay.
I was sort of in a lot of ways the ultimate for me is Beethoven.
I was gonna say I listened to this Beethoven piece, but I cannot tell you what the name is. Ooh, no. It's like number 62 something, but that one had me like really in my reading space. I was ready to take on the world. I've been listening to a couple different playlists, and there's some YouTubers that are putting these things together, and it's like classical music pretending that you're the villain, and just like listening to it in this really characterized type of space. And I guess that brings me to my next question. So you have such an expansive career creating music for different mediums, genres. Does your approach to these different projects, does it differ whether you're working on a film score or a television show or a video game? What does that look like for you?
Some concepts are the same. I've done everything from Bach to Beyonce, as they've said in the past, but some concepts are the same. But then again, the symphony orchestra, or the orchestra, I should say, is one of the most malleable and versatile musical ensembles that exists. Orchestral instruments can do anything. They can play anything. They can play in any genre, whether it's, European, classical music, or Broadway, or jazz, or pop, or what have you. So there are certain concepts that are the same regardless of whether you're playing, with Wu-Tang Clan, which I've worked with Wu-Tang Clan and RZA, or whether you're working on a Tchaikovsky symphony. But then again, some things are very different in regards to how you approach certain things if you're working on a film score or on a chamber orchestra. So there are certain things that are similar and certain things that are very different.
Okay, so I'm learning so much about you, and I'm staring at this beautiful background, by the way. I love this whole room you've got back there. I can't even tell if it's like a a Zoom screen or not, but even if it is, I love that. Let's see. I know that you've done some video game scores. Can you talk about like what games you've worked on and how? I feel like that must be really fun work.
Yeah, probably the video game that I'm most known for is the long association that I've had with League of Legends. League of Legends is the most played video game on earth. That has over 120 million active players worldwide. And, I've conducted pretty much all of the recording sessions here in Los Angeles and many concerts around the world. And many of these concerts have been the most viewed symphonic concerts in the world because, it's an esports game and it's a competitive game, and they have a finals ceremony where the best teams in the world are competing, and they have an opening ceremony that is watched by more people than watch the World Series. So it's so we'll have these gigantic orchestras with 50 or 60,000 people in an arena there live, and then many millions of people watching from all over the world. And the musical styles really run the gamut. You have some of the music sounds like a John Williams score, and then some of the music sounds pretty close to death metal. So we've had a variety of genres working with this particular video game entity. But yeah, I've gotten to conduct concerts in Spain and China and Korea, here in Los Angeles, and it's been an extraordinary experience.
Wow, I love that this has taken you worldwide. I know that you've worked with many artists like Beyonce, Kanye West, Snoop Dogg, Stevie Wonder. Can you tell us about your experience working with these artists, and what does that look like working together and having just this creative space and to really build all sorts of different genres of music?
Yeah, I remember working with, getting the opportunity to work with Kanye West on the orchestral. He wanted to do a live concert of his album 808s and Heartbreaks at the Hollywood Bowl. So we had a big orchestra there, and he had brought in a gigantic cast of talent. It was like 2 or 3 sold out days at the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. And it was interesting there's the person that you see in the media, and then there's the person that you're actually working with. And I remember, working with Kanye. He's very detail oriented and is very concerned about every single facet of the production. We worked on a speculative album for Snoop Dogg some time ago. I think it was called Hamlet on Ice, if I remember correctly. He's just absolutely one of the sweetest individuals I've ever had to work with, regardless of genre. And some time ago, I got to work alongside RZA for a Chipotle commercial that he was the composer for. So we put together an orchestra for him at Capitol Records, and it was a long day, very very fun day of getting to work alongside him. And they've all been of the utmost professionalism. And it was just very positive experiences all around.
So do you come from a family that listens to a lot of classical music, orchestras? Because I feel like classical music is something, and jazz as well, something that I've more so gotten to in my adult years, and something that I've really been listening to and enjoying a lot myself. Although my mother loves to go to the symphony and she talks about you a lot. So I definitely have that influence as well. But what was that like for you?
I would my household growing up, it was not a household that was listening necessarily a lot to classical music. It did appear, in the household every once in a while. We listened to a lot more Luther Vandross at my house, honestly, growing up. But the church, I came up through the Baptist church, so a lot of stuff going on at the church was very important. Church music was really important, so that was a big influence in my household. So I would say that classical music was not a huge part of my, sort of formative years. But sort of like the way that I got involved in classical music is sort of in a roundabout fashion. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about that.
No, we haven't, and I'm sure my viewers would love to hear.
Well, you know, I desperately, as a kid, you know, both of my parents are immigrants. My dad was born in 1929 in Kingston, Jamaica, and came to America in 1949 and fought in the Korean War and got a citizenship. And my mom is from Samoa. She came here in 1959, 1960. And, you know, so they're both these very hardworking immigrant parents, very no nonsense. And I, as a kid, saw those commercials to go to theme parks. And in Virginia, which is the state that I was born in, there's a couple of big theme parks. There's Busch Gardens and Kings Dominion, where they've got all these roller coasters. And I wanted to go on all of these roller coasters. And that just was not in the vocabulary at my household growing up. My parents were not invested in going to theme parks. That was just not in the budget. That was not in their line of interest. If you had ever known my parents, the thought of them on a roller coaster would not have ever crossed your mind. That is just the two very contrasting sort of situations here. But anyways, I was sitting in math class in the 8th grade, and over the intercom, the person over the intercom, the lovely lady, said, "Would all the members of the Lincoln Middle School Band report to the bus for their trip to Kings Dominion?" And about 3/4 of the class stood up, grabbed all these instrument cases, and they were just so excited and chatting with each other. You could just tell they couldn't wait to get out of class and go on this trip. So it felt like every few months, the band was going on a trip to a different theme park. They were performing at these theme parks. And I was like, oh, I got to get in on this gig. So I opened up the dictionary. I was like, I'm going to join the band. And I was going to select what instrument I was going to play. So I opened up the dictionary, turned to the A section. I saw the accordion, and I was like, oh no, I absolutely don't want to play the accordion. So I turned to the B section and I saw the bassoon, and I was like, oh yeah, this looks kind of cool. This looks kind of interesting. So I took the dictionary to my band director, David Webb at Lincoln Middle School. And I said, hi, my name is Anthony Parnther, and I would like to play the bassoon in the Lincoln Middle School Band next year. So that's literally how I got my start, was because I wanted to be sneaky and go on all these band trips.
What an incredible story. I literally wouldn't have thought about that at all. I love that. Little kid you was like, I'm gonna make a way, I'm gonna figure it out. And now look at you, from that moment, trying to go to theme parks. Now you're working with all of these artists, setting up all of these symphonies, and just doing incredible work. So I'm guessing you still play the bassoon. I don't know much about bassoon players. Is there anything about bassoon players that you wish more people knew?
Well, you know, it's one of the oldest instruments in the orchestra. I mean, the variants of the bassoon go back thousands of years, double reed instruments to Africa. But you know, the modern bassoon as we know it is from the 1400s, really developed a lot in the 1600s. So it's been involved in orchestras for hundreds of years. It's the bass instrument of the woodwind family. You know, so in an orchestra, you have the flute, clarinet, the oboe, and the bassoon. And the flute and the oboe are the soprano voices. The clarinet has a wide range and can move from soprano all the way through alto register. And the bassoon really occupies that tenor and bass register of the woodwind family. And then I also have the contrabassoon, which is like a gigantic bassoon, twice the size, which occupies the bass register of the whole orchestra. So those are the two instruments that I specialize in. And I've gotten to play it on many movie and television shows over the years, and as a soloist, as a chamber musician, and as a symphonic musician.
Can you talk a little bit about your music work within television shows? I know that when people are watching TV, they definitely must pick up on all of the orchestras and just the different songs that are playing in the background, because that's what follows the characters. You're always, especially in like horror films, you're hearing the music of the orchestra in the background to really get the feel for what's happening in the scene. And I wonder, like, what shows have you worked on, and what's your process around getting that feel for the scene?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about the history of cinema itself, before even there was dialogue, we're talking about going back to silent film, there was film and music. That's how cinema began, a little, around 100 years ago or so. It's a relatively new art form, compared to everything else when it comes to painting and music and dance and things along those lines. So cinema is the blend of all of those worlds. So music has always been a part of cinema. And then you go and you think about the most classic films. You think about Star Wars or Jurassic Park or Dr. Zhivago. I mean, so one of the first things a lot of people will think about is the themes from each of those shows. But anyways, a large amount of television and film uses an orchestra as underscore to help illustrate sonically what's going on in a scene, So oftentimes if there's anticipation or something, maybe something horrible is about to happen, you build tension up in the orchestra by having your violins and strings playing a tremolo and so forth, and it builds anticipation. And even though you're not necessarily listening, it's like, oh, there's a violin tremolo there, but you're experiencing the scene in such a way that the music has an unspoken but apparent, effect on your emotion. Or, like if you take a look at Lawrence of Arabia, there's those gorgeous scenes where they're just in the desert and this huge orchestra is playing this expansive music. So it's often about how do these instruments make you feel at any given time. So it's been fascinating as a bassoonist and as a conductor to get to do this for a living. I always, as a little kid, was a huge fan of Star Wars. So I had dreamed about getting to work with John Williams, who, as far as I'm concerned, is the gold standard of living film composers. I mean, he's been the composer for Jurassic Park and Indiana Jones and Star Wars and E.T. and Catch Me If You Can, and so many of the classic films that we all adore and love. And a lot of the general public can sing themes from all of those films. So anyways, as far as shows that I'm working on currently, one that a lot of people will recognize is that I conduct the score for Star Wars The Mandalorian, which is on Disney Plus. The composer is Ludwig Göransson, who won the Oscar for his amazing score to the Black Panther a couple of years ago. And but I've been the conductor for quite a large array of television shows and video games and movie scores over the years. And as a player, I've played on many things, going back to 2008, since I've been in California.
Oh man, this is so exciting. I love that. When you were talking about the emotions that different themes make you feel while watching these shows, I kind of brought it back to, or my mind brought it back to Mr. Krabs in SpongeBob when he plays his tiny little violin. And I know a lot of people always bring that up, and it's just like whenever something is sad in the scene and Mr. Krabs is there, he just plays his little tiny violin, and that little composition will always stick in my mind because of that. Well, I'm trying to think. I don't know, when I think about the bassoon, I don't know if I know what it sounds like. And I don't want to ask you to play it because I feel like you definitely probably don't have it right next to you. And I know that that's doing a lot, but I definitely would love to hear more about the bassoon and thinking about what that is like in the orchestra. Yeah.
What I could do is I could maybe give you an excerpt from the San Bernardino Symphony concert where I'm playing the solo bassoon on the Vivaldi bassoon concerto, because we just recorded that with the San Bernardino Symphony. So I could maybe give you a example of that.
Yeah, that'd actually be really cool. That would be really cool.
Just you could just show a little bit of that.
No, absolutely. We'll have to make that happen.
Yeah.
To like do a part of the show and like show the bassoon with the symphony, so that our viewers can know what it sounds like.
Absolutely. He can and we can cut this part out, of course, but whatever he wants to send us, we can put that into the program.
Okay, yeah. So you can you can send that to us, and we'll put it in when the video comes out, so that our viewers can hear. Okay, I'll give us like 3 seconds, and then we can come back into our conversation. So
yeah, and we can definitely do that. Just send me the files, and we can add that into the episode.
Awesome, cool. I was like, I want to have space so Nick is not like trying to grab the.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Whenever we mess up, we gotta like take a break, come back in. Okay. So I guess I'll bring it back into this contemporary space of what is happening currently. What does the orchestra look like in this pandemic age? What is it? Has it taught you anything, or has it caused you to have a new perspective on performing? How is the orchestra able to be an orchestra during this time?
It's been very difficult, especially at first when the pandemic first hit and shut concert halls down back in March of last year. In fact, pretty much most concert halls in America still are closed to this day, over a year later. It was devastating. It devastated the workforce. I mean, because there's so many musicians, especially freelancers, who depend on the various orchestras that they play in as a major part of their income. And there are some musicians who play in one orchestra. So you take a look at people who play in like the LA Philharmonic or the Pacific Symphony or the San Diego Symphony. That's their job. Their job is to play in those orchestras, and they're completely shut out of that. So it's been a complex time. The studios shut down. They reopened, but under very different guidelines in July. I remember the first film that I played on was a new Despicable. It was one of the sequels to Despicable Me, Rise of Gru, I believe. That was the very first thing that we recorded. But normally that would have been a 90 or 100-piece orchestra, but we had to record it woodwinds only. And the woodwinds were separated by dividers, and it was a very different recording experience, to just have the woodwinds only in the room and not have the strings or the brass or the percussion. And then the first thing that I conducted was over at Fox, and that was The Mandalorian. Is that we had to, very quickly record all those episodes before they were released later that fall. And The Mandalorian is normally a very large orchestra, but we just had to record it section by section. And, so musicians, first and foremost, are risking their lives literally to come out and make music. They really are. There is a lot of protocol. I mean, you have to take a COVID test. You have to get your temperature checked at the entrance for all of these events. String players normally sit 2 chairs to 1 stand, but now they have to sit 6 feet apart. Nobody's sharing a stand. You have to have a mask on the entire time if you're not playing a wind or brass instrument. So, and then, you've got to socially distance during the session. So sessions have been very, very different. A lot of musicians, especially those who have home recording studios, have been recording their own individual part at home, which is so different from recording amongst your colleagues in the studio space, because normally you're listening for everybody else, for their energy, for their intonation, for the style that they're playing in. But now it's kind of like everybody's just doing their best, and the engineer has to throw all of that stuff together. So it's been vastly different. as restrictions began to ease, you know, the San Bernardino Symphony, for instance, we began to record our orchestra. So our first concert that we did in February, we did it just like the studios did. We recorded the brass on a certain day, we recorded the woodwinds on a certain day, and we recorded the strings on a certain day. And then we combined it in post-production in order to unite our entire orchestra. But our orchestra has not all met in the same room yet. We're hoping that that'll happen later this fall.
So you really do have to have a really strong production team then, because I can imagine that like the sound, even in the sound quality, because you're so far apart, you know, the mixing of these sounds doesn't do what it did at all. It must be extremely different.
Yeah, in order to do that, we have to determine all of the tempos ahead of time. And then you always record the strings first, and then you add the woodwinds, and then you add the brass. And that's how we do it in the studios, is that we record the strings first, woodwinds, and then we add brass and percussion last. And because we can always refer to the string sound, since it's the largest section of the orchestra, we always refer to their intonation first and foremost, and their style. So we determine that with the strings, and then we add all the other sections to that in order to sort of facilitate a complete recording.
So I was going to ask, how has this affected your creativity? And I'm sure that it's had to change the way that you think about being the maestro and really controlling how all of these sounds are produced and made.
Yeah. What it's given me the opportunity to do is to take the programming that we had and modify it in such a way that it works to the advantage of this new territory that we're in. So we had a program originally installed, but you know, now that we had to kind of chop our orchestra up into sections, what I did is I featured pieces that called only for the strings. I featured a piece that called only for woodwinds, piece that featured only the brass, and then some works that feature all of them or combinations of all of them together. So it was a good opportunity for me to get to know my orchestra a lot more intimately, because normally I have all 70 or 80 of them in the room at the same time. But, you know, for this recording process, I got to have just my brass section, just my woodwind section, just my string section. So there was a lot of positives about getting to work with my orchestra under those auspices as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, I do want to change gears for a second. For someone who is wanting to get into the symphony, wanting to find out about what orchestras do, wanting to get into instruments, do you have any advice? What is, like, do you need to be this young person in your formative years to do it? I'm 23. Can someone my age start? Can someone older than me start? Like, what does that look like for being a musician?
You know, I remember I was in my car with a friend of mine who is not a musician whatsoever. They, you know, they work in a completely different field. But I remember they made a comment that was kind of interesting to me. They were just like, you guys just sit around and make music and have fun all day, don't y'all? You know, it was, and I don't think they meant it as a diminishing comment, but I think what a lot of people don't realize is that in order to be an orchestral musician requires many, many years of training. It's not something that you can't just pick up a flute today and be ready to play in an orchestra next week. It is a talent that takes years and years to cultivate. So, you know, if you take a look at the average working orchestral musician, it's about 15 minimum years of training in order for them to have gotten where they are. Because, you know, most people start on their, I mean, violin players tend to start, you know, as young as, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, you know, they tend to start very, very, very young. And then, you know, with wind and brass players, they tend to start around middle school age because you have to be a certain size to even cover up a clarinet hole, or to be able to play a trombone in 5th, 6th, or 7th position. You have to actually be a certain size. You know, for at least for string players, they can play on modified string instruments that are fractional in size. You can play on like a half-size violin or 3/5 side, but we don't really have as many fractional clarinets or bassoons or trombones or things along those lines that are usable for small, tiny little children. So they actually have to wait until they're big enough to play them. But for wind and brass players, they normally start in the 5th or 6th or 7th grade, and then going through middle school, high school, they'll go to an intense undergraduate and in a lot of cases graduate or postgraduate program. You get into festivals, and then you start off as a freelancer and things along those lines. And you have to learn about music from the 1600s all the way to, you have to learn about music that covers a 400-year time span. And you don't play music in the 1600s the way that you would play them in the 1700s. You have to learn the style of the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, the 1900s, and then, the 20th century and contemporary practices. So there's a lot that you have to learn. You have to learn what it's like to be in an orchestra, the hierarchy of how everything works. So it is not impossible for somebody who's 23 or older to do this, but it would take significant and intense training in order to pursue this as a profession and to do it at the professional level. Because again, most of the people who are at the beginnings of their career in classical music have already been doing it for well over a decade, so it's a lot. And then there's the expense of an instrument, maintaining an instrument, lessons, it takes a lot of resources to produce an orchestral musician.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, oh my goodness, I am just so at awe at this entire conversation and just thinking about how many opportunities so many young people have to explore this field and see what that might be like for them. Just one more question before we go. I really want to know, do you have like a dream project? Is there something that you're still like longing to do within your field?
I was thinking about this recently, but I am literally living the dream that I always wanted. I'm getting to play and record on the biggest movies that come through Hollywood and conduct them. And I'm conducting, professionally here in California and worldwide. So I feel in a lot of ways that I have realized the dream that I wanted for myself. I think beyond this point, what I'm interested in doing now is turning more attention toward composing music for film and television. I've always wanted to try to be the most complete musician I possibly could. Leonard Bernstein is a huge influence on me because he was an amazing educator. He was a great teacher. He was an amazing pianist. He was an amazing conductor, and he was an amazing composer. And I think all of the composers all of the conductors that I admire the most were those who were complete in all those regards. They really approached music from every possible level. So I think is sort of the final frontier for me is me taking my composing a lot more seriously and bringing that to the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. This has been incredible. I really look forward to seeing your compositions and everything else that you continue to do. Thank you so much. What an inspiring conversation. I hope that you all enjoyed Maestro Anthony Parnther as much as I did. I hope you learned something. Again, we're doing this from home, and if you want to catch more episodes and be tuned in, please click our description box below to find out more information. And then also, if you would like to support us further, please visit blackvoicenews.com for more information. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends. I'll see you again next week. Peace.